What is a valid contract? What is a voidable contract? What is a void contract? And how can you tell the difference between all of those? Now, if you have any of these types of questions as you are preparing for the Illinois broker examination, then keep watching because I will explain all of that to you here. Also, stay tuned to the end because I have some sample questions that we'll go over together. Let's jump into the material. All right, so why do we actually cover contracts? Now, if you think about it, there's a lot of paperwork that's going to go on between your interactions with your clients, and then also if a buyer or a seller is purchasing real estate or selling their property, the documents that are used are contracts, right? So we need to understand how these contracts work. We need to also understand what makes them legal. Now, in your class, you guys don't go over the contracts and how to write them and what each one is for, but there is a general contract law that covers all contracts. So that's kind of what we'll be covering today. Okay. All right. So in the next slide, it says on here that a contract is a voluntary promise a voluntary agreement or promise. Now, look at those keywords because those are very essential to what we're talking about. It is voluntary, so anything that's entered into without your own free will is not a valid contract. It's an agreement, it's a promise between legally competent parties. So there has to be some parties involved. All right? Legal consideration, we're going to talk about that. So something of value that's being exchanged and then to perform a legal act. Meaning, if the contract is for something illegal, it is not a valid contract. Right? Now, the next thing we will talk about here is how contracts are initiated or how they are made. There are two ways, and the first is express, the next is implied. If you think about those two words, actually, they kind of help you understand what they mean. So when I express to you that we have a contract, I'm either telling you verbally or it's in writing. So it's intentionally stated. And then when it's implied, think of the word implied through your action. So we're assuming because we're doing XYZ, we have a contract in place. Okay? Let me give you an example of an implied contract. You walk into a grocery store. You pick up oranges and bananas, right? You walk to the self checkout. You don't talk to anybody, but you walk to the self checkout, you pay for your items, and you walk away. What would have happened if you didn't pay for the items and you just grabbed the oranges and bananas and walked out of the store? Right? They would call the cops on you because they would say that you're trying to steal their items. Right? So that is an implied contract. When you walk into a store and pick up some items, it's implied that you're going to pay for those items that you took. And you don't have to verbally express it or have anything in writing to enforce that contract. Okay? Same thing with some of the relationships we have with our clients. Sometimes we don't essentially say, okay, so I'm representing you, or they don't say, hey, you're my agent. But through our actions, it's implied that we have an agreement with them. All right. So that is express and implied. Next thing is we need to know the things that make a contract valid. And there are 5 essential elements that do so. And they are listed here on the screen. And we will talk about each one individually. All right. First is offer and acceptance. With offer and acceptance being the first one, think about it. A seller has a home on the market. You are the buyer, for example, I'm the seller. You make an offer to me, I accept it. Now we have an agreement. But if you make an offer to me and I don't accept it, do we have an agreement? The answer is no. On the screen, I have offeror, offeree. The offeror, the OR, is always the giver, and the offeree is always the recipient. So think about employer, employee. So the employee is employed by the employer. The offeror is the one making the offer. The offeree is the one receiving the offer. If The seller, for example, if I, like I said, I'm the seller, you make an offer to me and I counter your offer. When I counter your offer, now I am the offeror and you will become the offeree because your initial offer no longer exists because I rejected it and sent you a counter offer. So when I send you a counter offer, now what that does is I am making an offer to you. So now I am the offeror and you are the offeree. Next thing I have on the slide is that an offeror can withdraw an offer at any time before it is accepted, right? Essentially, all that says is true 100% of the time. Even though you tell them, hey, I'm keeping my offer open for 10 days. If on day 7, the seller has not accepted my offer, I can withdraw, even if I told you I'll wait for 10 days. Okay? So the offer can be withdrawn at any time before it is accepted. As brokers, it is our responsibility to make sure that we communicate the information quickly between our clients. So if your client says, I accept the offer, now what you need to do is make sure you send that to the other client, the buyer's client or the seller's client, so that they can also notify their client that the offer has been accepted. Okay. And then finally, an offer is not considered accepted until the person who made the offer is notified. Right? So that is very, very essential, and you need to remember that. All right, let's look at this scenario here. There is a buyer. They make an offer of $400,000 to the seller. The seller says, nope, I'm countering your offer, and now I am making you an offer of 415. At this point, if you notice, the seller becomes the offeror, and the buyer is now the offeree. The buyer accepts the offer, everyone is notified, and now we have a valid contract. Okay. Next is consideration. With consideration, like I said here on the screen, think money. But it's not only money. It could be crypto, it could be stocks, it could be bonds, it could be love and affection. All right. So it is something of value that I'm offering to you in return for what you're going to give to me. If we're renting, for example, the amount I'm paying in rent will be consideration to get your house. If I'm selling, I'm getting your house and I'm paying you money, that will be consideration. So there always has to be consideration when we're talking about contracts. Third thing is we must have legally competent parties involved. And when we talk about legal competency, we're talking about age and mental capacity. So in Illinois, the legal age is 18. So the person needs to be at least 18 and be mentally capable of understanding everything that's going on, including the risk of actually entering into that agreement. Does that mean a minor cannot enter into a contract? The answer is no, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on when we go into a different subject, right? Next one is reality of consent. In this, it is essentially stating that in order for us to have a valid contract, the parties must be doing this of their own voluntary free will. So anyone entering into an agreement where they are being forced, or maybe they're under the influence, or maybe they're a minor, all right, they may have some legal grounds to get out of that agreement. And we'll talk about that later on as well. But generally, remember the definition of a contract. It's a voluntary promise or agreement. So if it wasn't voluntary, then it is not a valid contract. And then last but not least is legal purpose. All right. This one is pretty much self-explanatory. It cannot be for something illegal. So for example, if two people say, hey, we're going to rob a bank and let's get the money, you guys go rob the bank, but then one person runs away with the money, can you sue that person? The answer is no, because you guys committed something that was illegal and your agreement was for something illegal. So just to recap, we have offer and acceptance, right? Then we have legally competent parties. We have, consideration, legally competent parties, legality of consent, then for a legal purpose. Validity of contracts. And I forgot to say this earlier, but if you ever need to pause to just take notes, feel free to do that. If you need to go back and review some things that I said, feel free to do that. That's why this is a video, so you could go at it on your own pace, right? So validity of contracts. There are four things you need to know: a valid contract, a void contract, voidable contract, and unenforceable contract. So let's talk about valid and then void, and we'll talk about the others. We just talked about the five essential elements, right? So if everything in there is in this contract that we have, then we have a valid contract. On the other hand, it's void if we don't have all of those in there. For example, we have offer, but we don't have acceptance. Or we have something for an illegal purpose, like the example I gave earlier about robbing a bank. That would then be a void contract. A voidable contract, on the other hand, is one whereby on the surface it looks good, it has all the five essential elements, but there is some legal principle in the agreement that gives us grounds to potentially cancel the contract. So a voidable contract, void able, that means it's able to be voided, right? There is something in there that will allow us void the contract. So a voidable contract is one that can be voided. There are four things you need to remember when it comes to voidable contracts. Number one, if it's a minor, it's a voidable contract. If the contract was entered into under duress, it is a voidable contract. What I mean by duress is either you were, maybe someone had a knife to your head or something and said, if you don't sign this, blah, blah, blah. Or they were trying to bait you, okay, if you don't sign this, and I'm not going to take care of the kids, or something like that, right? So you kind of feel obligated. It's not voluntary. Third is under if you're intoxicated. So a person who is intoxicated when they enter into a contract, it's a voidable contract. And then fourth is someone experiencing a mental illness. So while they are in that state, right, and they enter into a contract, it is voidable. So it's a voidable contract. And what that means is these four categories that I mentioned, they could still decide to go forward with the contract, right? But because of those four things, if they feel that the other person is taking advantage of them, then based on one of those four things, they could back out of the contract. All right. So hope that makes sense. For a void contract, it doesn't have all the essential elements. For a voidable contract, it has everything, but there is something in that contract that gives us legal grounds to back out of it. So we're able to void the contract. And then finally is unenforceable. This means that we cannot go forward with this agreement. There's something that happened or something that took place and we need to cancel. For example, I'm supposed to buy a house from you. 2 days to closing, the house burns down. Can you force me to give you the money that I was going to pay you for that house? The answer is no. So you cannot enforce that agreement. So those are the four, right? A valid contract, a void contract, a voidable contract, and then an unenforceable contract. A few other terms, and then we'll get into the questions. Performance of a contract. When you're performing, that means you're doing what you said you were going to do. So you're fulfilling the promises that you made in the contract. For example, I'm going to buy your house, but I need to get a loan. So after you agree to the contract, I'm trying to get that loan approved so that I can get the money to buy your house. So that's where I am performing on the contract. If I don't do that, that means I am violating the contract or I am breaching the contract. The next term here is assignment. An assignment is one whereby the contract itself and the terms of the contract do not change, but one party changes. So we substitute one person for another. For example, and this happens a lot when it comes to mortgages. Let's say you got your mortgage, for example, from Bank of America. 2 years down the road, Bank of America sells it to Chase. You get a letter in the mail that says, no, do not send your payments to Bank of America anymore. Going forward from next month, begin sending your payments to Chase. And this is the address, da 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 da. Your monthly payments are still the same. All the terms and agreements are still the same. That is an assignment. Innovation, on the other hand, is one whereby we are not changing the people, but we're changing the actual contract. So let's say you and I have a contract. Actually, let's go back to the example I gave before. We had an agreement. I was going to buy your house. Then the house burnt down. And so I'm about to walk away. And you're like, wait, hold on. I actually have another house down the road, almost the same. Actually, it's even a nicer house. I will give that to you for the price of this one. So we could just, same people, get another contract for that other house and I'll sell that other house to you. If I say yes, now we have an novation. So the people are not changing, but the actual contract changes. Right? Now let's get into the questions. And like I said earlier, if you need to go back, review anything there, feel free to do that. Okay. So first question here, which of these is not essential to the formation of a contract? Offer, legal purpose, consideration, or performance? The answer is performance. Oops. All right, performance. All right. So remember again, offer and acceptance, consideration, reality of consent, legally competent parties, and then we have for legal purpose. Okay. Next, if upon receipt of an offer to purchase, if upon receipt of an offer to purchase his property, a seller makes a counteroffer, the prospective buyer is A, bound by his original offer, B, relieved of his original offer, C, bound to accept the counteroffer, D, bound by whichever offer is lower. If you said B as in boy, you are correct, right? Remember, once there is a counter offer, the original offer is gone. Now the counter offer is the only one that is valid. And it's not C because the buyer does not have to accept the seller's offer, right? The buyer can also counter that offer. Okay. And you're not bound by whichever is lower. Whatever you want to take is what you want to take. And of course, the original one is no longer valid anyway. So you're not even bound by that anymore. Okay. And then our final question here. A contract agreed to under duress is voidable, breached, novation, or void. Voidable, breached, novation, or void. Now, let's do a simple technique of answering questions. So let's say you're looking at this and you don't actually know which one is the right answer. All right. So first things first, when you're taking these exams, usually there are two answers that would be incorrect. You already know these two are not it. And then there are two that you're like, okay, it could be one of these two. So the first thing you want to do is eliminate the ones that you know are not the right answer. So in this situation, B and C are not part of things that make the validity of a contract, right? Because we just talked about novation. Novation is when you're substituting one contract for another. Breach is when you're violating the terms of the agreement. So we're between voidable and void. Go back to the question. A contract agreed to under duress is, so it's been agreed to, but you were under duress. So you are able to void it because you were under a duress. So our answer would be A as in apple for voidable. All right, so A as in apple for voidable. Again, for voidable, we said duress, intoxication, a minor, and then also someone who has mental health illness. So those four things would be voidable. And then I actually have one more question. All right, so a broker receives earnest money deposit with a written offer to purchase that includes a 5-day acceptance clause. On day 3, before the offer is accepted, the buyer notifies the broker that she is withdrawing the offer and demands the return of the earnest money deposit. In this situation, option A, the buyer cannot withdraw the offer because we are on day 3 of the 5-day period. Does that sound right? Option B, the buyer has the right to withdraw the offer at any time until it is accepted and recover the earnest money. Does that sound right? Yeah. Okay. But let's go through all of them just to make sure. C, the seller and the broker have the rights to each retain the deposit. Can we do that? No. D, the broker declares the deposit forfeited and retains it for his services. Can a broker do that? The answer is no. So based on that, our answer is B as in boy. All right. So with that, we have come to the end of this video. I hope this was helpful to you. Let me know in the comments if you have additional questions. Like I said earlier, go back if you need to review anything else. Let me know in the comments if you have questions, other topics you want me to cover. I'll be glad to do those. As always, I will link another video here that you can continue to as you prepare for the examination. I will see you in the next video.